Welcome to Midlife Women Entrepreneurs, where you'll find real stories, practical strategies, and the mindset shifts you need for entrepreneurship. If you've ever felt like midlife was too late to launch a business, write a book, or chase a dream, think again. I'm Lynette Turner, your host, so let's jump in. All right. Well, Mirabai, I'm excited to have you here today. We met a few weeks ago through a mutual connection on Instagram, which seems to be a common theme for me these days, which is wonderful. It's interesting how social media has made these connections with each other. But we're here today to talk a little bit about your business. I want you to kick us all off with a little bit of your backstory, where you're coming from, and then we're going to get right into what you do and the business that you're growing, and just, I guess, overall, just this relationship with self, which is like, oh, when I think about it, it sort of becomes a struggle for me right out of the gate. So I'm going to hand the floor to you. Give us a little bit of a backstory and we'll be off.
Okay. Well, first of all, Lynette, thank you so much for inviting me. It's been really wonderful getting to know you. I had one beautiful meeting with you and it was just absolutely amazing. I feel like you're my soul sister.
I love that. I love that, by the way. Yeah, there was a really nice connection.
Yeah. So a little bit about me. I have an interesting history. Born in US, raised in Serbia, moved back here when I was 16. My journey is very chaotic in the sense that I came from a dysfunctional family system, and like many of us, I think.
Yeah.
And really, by the time I was 21, I was completely deprived of self-love. Like, I really didn't understand myself. I was struggling with depression and anxiety. I was studying psychology. I was getting a psychology degree at John Jay College of Criminal Justice, and eventually went on to get my social work degree at Fordham University. But during that time, I was really exploring myself because I was really trying to understand why I was struggling with depression and anxiety. I really had a hard time being myself. I had a hard time connecting. I really had huge commitment issues. And, committing for the rest of my life was kind of like, felt like I'm going to choke and die. And it was very scary. So I very early on, like at the age of 22, after going to psychotherapy for 1 year, and not working and not really feeling I was making any progress, I decided I'm going to explore spirituality. And I stepped into a path of spirituality. And this is how I met my teacher, who I met at the cookie stand at the Union Square Market in 2005 when I was getting a master's degree in social work. And he was selling these cookies, and I would go to his stand after internship just to relax, just to like be around vegetables and people selling just like fresh produce. And I would gravitate towards this cookie stand. And one day he just started talking to me about my inner child. And I just was like captivated by what he was saying. And that was it. Like, I didn't leave his side since that moment on, And he was the one that introduced me to the whole concept of developing relationship with self, and how that started by him saying to me, and he would call me Boo Boo Boy. He's like, Boo Boo Boy, love yourself. And I was like, what do you mean love myself? What do I do? Do I hug myself? Do I kiss myself? Like, what do I need to do? And he would be like, that is your homework assignment, not mine. And so I ended up studying with him for 8 years, living with him. He taught me so much about life. And that's where the whole concept of self-relationship came from, is my own journey of healing my relationship to myself. And it also then, of course, my work came in. I started to work in the mental health field, and I started to notice like all of these people, fundamentally their relationship with themselves is damaged because of this relational trauma, right? Childhood relational trauma. And I began to realize everywhere around, like, most of us are struggling with this. If you're a human being, and you have parents, I'm sorry, but 99.9% of us have relational trauma, whether we realize it or not. This is transgenerational thing, right? It passes on from one generation to another. And if we are not in the work of self-development, right, and developing ourselves consciously, we are going to pass on this unconscious patterns and belief systems that are extremely limiting and comes from a place of conditional loving, right? Our parents love us, but they love us conditionally, right? Because they were loved conditionally. And so these ruptures happen between us and the parents, and those extremely painful moments that define our life and define how we feel about ourselves and how we perceive ourselves, and also how we perceive the world and how we navigate the world, right? And how we relate in our relationships. And so this is where the whole self-relational work came from. My own personal journey with my teacher and the study, right, in the social work school and working with people. And here I am now talking with you about this work. And this has been in making from 2005 when I first met my teacher, right? It's been a quite journey getting to this place.
No, and it's a great one. And, when I first met you, I had so many questions. Like you had given me that introduction to yourself, and I thought, oh my God. Okay. First of all, inner child work. I've heard a lot about that. I've probably dipped my toe a little bit into that inner child work, where there was one exercise I remember somebody saying, like, go back to a moment in time when you were younger, your younger self, and that where you needed to be nurtured, or where some sort of traumatic thing happened, and, give yourself a hug and say it's going to be okay. And then this whole thing, relationship to self, like, and self-love and self-care. It's just like, oh, what does it even mean? Like, I feel like self-care, some people, oh, don't forget about self-care. Go to the spa, go do meditation, go get a manicure, go get a pedicure. But it really, to me, it's very surface level. All that stuff, all that kind of investigation, if you will, seemed very surface. And then when you ask the question, or you say to yourself, I need to learn how to love myself. It's like, well, I don't even know what that means. Like, do I get, like you said, do I give myself a big hug and say, hey, Lynette, I love you? And so that's kind of what I want to unpack a little bit on this podcast today, Mirabai, is like, what does that all mean? And maybe we could start where you're talking a little bit about where your inner child, things were damaged when you were younger. Unfortunately, everybody had parents. And I know that I've done my own, I guess, trauma to my kids, because that sort of generational trauma is something that you don't even realize. I mean, I think way back in the day when I was, first a mother, and I didn't realize that even my parents needed to do the work. And I think we expected them to be so perfect, and that's how they were, and they didn't need help. But I think, when I look back at it, yes, for sure, they had their own generational trauma that just gets passed along and stuff. So maybe we could talk a little bit about that first, like the inner child. What, do you start there? Do you start first where your guru had mentioned to you, you learn to love yourself? That's your homework. Like, where would you say somebody should start to work? And one more comment is, what happens if you can't go back to your inner child and remember any of those moments? So I can't heal my inner child in my mind, and I know you're going to call me out on that, if I don't remember those moments.
Yeah. So I'm going to start first. We experience and learn about ourselves and life in our bodies. So all the experiences are recorded in the cells of our bodies. There's a memory there. And our brain is really good at recording negative memories, meaning painful, scary memories. Its job is to help you survive. That's the brain function, right? And so when experiences are happening early on in our childhood life, like our brain is forming, the neural network is forming, right? And how it's forming through repetition. The more you repeat something, the more that neural network is formed, and it fires faster. You don't have to think about. And so when you're having these experiences, they are fully embodied experiences. And when we are having a painful, scary experience, such as losing our parents' love, for example, in a moment, right? That is devastating to a child, right? It's just like the worst thing you can do. The world falls apart. And it only takes one experience to be deeply imprinted in your cell and in your memory bank, right? It's wired, boom. It's such a powerful experience. And that experience alone is going to create a set of relational pattern in the way we learn how to manage our internal distress. Like how, when I am distressed as a child, if my parent is not there to help me self-regulate, I have to find a way to manage this, right? So I might start by shutting down, right? I'm going to shut down. I'm going to withdraw, right? Or I may go into having a tantrum and reactivity and anger, right? Anger issues. Or I may start like really people pleasing and just kind of being fully attuned to a parent and kind of like taking care of parents' needs and emotions and completely forgetting self. So those are like common relational pattern that the children develop when the parent is not able to repair that rupture. And in those moments when that rupture happens, part of ourselves kind of split off, right? And even though we're physically growing, that emotional part of self is stuck in that time frame. And it's what we say unintegrated. And so it exists in its own vacuum of its time. And as we're moving through life and we get exposed to something that reminds us of that original event, that part of self kicks in and those emotions just come to the surface. And we don't know why we're feeling it because we are disconnected from that part. Because the way kids deal with their painful moments is they just suppress. It's like to move on, to continue to live, they have to disconnect with those emotions. We all do that, right? It's like we suppress it and we move on, right?
Mm-hmm.
But the
I
problem
definitely
is
can
that
relate. Sorry,
Mhm.
I
Go
just
ahead.
wanted to like just say something there because I think that I can definitely relate to that shutting down process, right? That you're talking about where you don't know how to handle them when you're little, so you just started to just internalize it and then changed your own approach to different things. And I think that shutdown and withdrawal or that lashing out are probably the two main pieces that and if you think about that when you were little and now subconsciously that's just how your body is running, right? So for
Right.
you, when you work with somebody, you look to figure out what their response is to certain events,
I
or yeah.
Yeah, I don't figure out anything. This is the beauty about my work that I develop, which I call self-relational experiencing work, is that I guide the person to be fully present to what it feels like to be in the body when they're thinking about something that triggers them. The emotions come up, the tension maybe come up, the disconnection may come up, but then I ask them to be present. And by being present and tracking where they're at, so I do tracking and I guide them to track their own emotions and to be fully present and to experience them. In doing so, we connect with those parts that hold those emotions, with those younger parts of self, right? And then we make a connection with that part. And now that person is able to become that loving enough parent, right? Good enough parent that can mend that relationship with that wounded part of self, right? That was kind of left there without understanding what just happened. Why did this happen? Like it must happen because I'm bad or I'm not good or I'm doing something wrong, right? And so then you get to help that part of self to kind of move through those emotions from the present self, meeting the past self, right? That younger self. And it's a very powerful process once you become aware of your inner child, and then you can work, with that part of self. And when the emotions come up, you can say like, oh, there goes my little girl. She's coming up. She's having a tantrum,
Exactly. Oh my God. I was just thinking that. Oh my God. It's so true. And, since just over the past year, I've been really kind of focused in on the inner child work. And then after talking to you a few weeks ago, I was like, I've really been quite intentional to be thinking about my response and my reaction to things. And I think like it's kind of crazy, like a lot of, so that's where that's coming from without even really thinking about where is that coming from. It's hard to explain what I like. Just because when we were chatting, you said to me, Lynette, every question you're asking me is from here, your head, your brain, and you're thinking, Hey, it's Lynette. Thanks
you
for
referred
listening today.
to
Please
almost being
like
that
and subscribe. And
masculine
if there's somebody out
energy
there that
kind
you
of thing.
think could
And I
benefit
think
from the
so.
episode, give it a share.
How I sort
Midlife
of
is your time,
internalized
so
that was
go
like,
get it.
yeah, because I've been trying to take care of myself for all my life, and it always had to come from critical thinking. And now when I try to like go more from the heart, which you had mentioned was more on the feminine side of things, I'm like, oh, it's much softer. You just become softer. It wasn't even, it wasn't even an intentional thought to be, I'm thinking from my brain, and it felt harsh and judging, very judging. And then I thought, okay, well, if I thought more from my feminine side, my heart side, which Mirabai said to do, what does that really, how do I feel now? And it's much more forgiving, and it's much more accepting. And therefore, whatever the consequence was of that certain moment where I had to make that adjustment to not think from the brain, but think more from the heart, my response was way better too. To post that event, it was much more understanding, apologetic, empathetic, whatever the case may be. So I thought that's interesting. Well, the key, again, I always say to people, is awareness. Once you become aware of something, you cannot become unaware. Does that make sense?
Oh God, that totally, right? And all it took was that one conversation with you, because if my friends and we've been chatting lots around masculine and feminine energy, and I do hang around, I do have a lot of girlfriends that are very A-type personalities. We're all super strong, super independent, but I know that is not how we want to come from, always that energy, but we default to that energy. And I don't know what else to like. There's other than being critical thinking, like thinking critically about, okay, where am I making this decision from? Is it from the heart or from the head? And I even feel more feminine when I'm thinking from the heart, if you can actually do that, or if you're feeling from the heart, or you're responding from the heart. So talk a little bit more about that, because I really loved that analogy, how you can sort of make the differentiation. And you, like you had mentioned, you need both, right? You need the yin and the yang of it.
So, yes, a lot of women, including myself, I was born in 1977, right? And I was that part of the generation of aspiring to have a career, to be independent woman,
Yeah, exactly.
And that meant being very masculine. That meant like logical thinking, and schools are designed that way, from that thinking logical. And, I have dyslexia, so I learned differently. I learned through experiencing. So I had to adjust and learn how to learn like everybody else is learning, because I am more like a right brain oriented person, right? And so that was quite, twisted my mind a little bit. But then I had to come back to the feminine without even realizing I was coming back to the feminine. Because I have to tell you, when I was 21, when people were saying like a woman, and I'm like, I don't know what it means to be a woman. What is it? Because my teacher one time asked me, he was like, what does it mean to be a woman? And I just stared at him, blank face, could not answer the question. And I was like, I don't know. I don't even feel like a woman. Like, I didn't even feel like a woman. And it was that part that I was disconnected from my heart and the wisdom of the heart. And, love is not valued as it is power and fear. Like, if you look at the way society it is, everything is like constructed from a place of consequences, not the place of compassion and giving and believing that, that in unconditional love, transformation takes place. And there's always like a fear that drives the person to make the changes. Like, it's like if you are harsh enough, if you give a person F and not an A, if if you give this person reward and this person you punish, the way the whole system is designed from a masculine, extremely masculine way. And we're designed to just think, think, think. And when it comes to emotions and connecting without beingness, it's not about thinking, it's about feeling. It's about connecting with your heart. It's about being in your body, experiencing yourself in the body, and allowing the wisdom of the heart to guide you, your intuition to guide you. The heart is the center of your intuition. And
I love that. That's just, I feel like I'm cutting you off, but you're saying
That's
so
okay.
much good stuff, and I don't want to lose it.
No.
I love that. And I just want to go back to what you said about, like, sometimes something will happen to us and we approach it with this, okay, we got to get this done. We got to do this. We've got to do this. We've got to do this. And that's that harsh thinking, masculine energy, because we automatically, I think as women, go into survival mode quite quickly. And that survival mode can be mostly from this sort of masculine side of it, as you're saying. But then when you were talking about, but doing it more from the heart center and then drawing on the intuition, that just felt so right, because I think as women, we are super intuitive. Like, we can take and draw on our intuition a lot. So walk us through that. Like, what happens when we make decisions solely from the masculine versus even maybe a combination, or more from the feminine?
Well, when we're just making from the masculine, we disconnect from our heart place. Like, we're not living a life from a place of inspiration and passion. We're living from a place of supposed to, must, kind of obligation, expectations, competition, right? The fear of scarcity. And then when we're living just from the feminine and not utilizing also masculine, then we are imbalanced. We might feel weaker and not strong enough to navigate in the world. And, as a woman, we may feel like we can't do it on our own because we need the also masculine, right? But the masculine energy is like, the lead is feminine, right? The feminine comes in and the masculine is there to follow, right? It's kind of like allowing masculine to support the feminine. Feminine has that gentle, powerful wisdom, love, compassion, right? But the masculine is like there to support that, to support that so that it can actually create the transformation that is needed. And so when the masculine and feminine come together, they really complement each other. But we need to allow the feminine to lead, not the masculine. It's backwards.
Right. Yeah. And I think I could probably tell you, anybody that I know would lead first with the masculine for sure. But I could see how that makes sense to lead with the feminine, which is more of a calming, stable kind of approach, where, you can't, when you're in a situation and you're trying to solve that problem, coming from this like intense, oh my God, panic, just creates more chaos. And I think what it does is it shuts you down, and you can't then think intuitively. You can't use your intuition.
Yes.
You just go right into that think mode. Yeah, that's really interesting. So tell me, when you're working with your clients, what is the first thing that you do with them? Like, how do you assess where you say you don't help them? Well, pardon me, you don't make those decisions for them or tell them what's wrong. You get them to, figure it out on their own. How do you start working with somebody in your
Well, I
practice?
mean, I would obviously listen their challenges, right? So they would do a deep listening of where they're at and where they're struggling, help them to figure out where they want to be. Where are you right now, right? And what is it that you're struggling with, and where do you want to be, right? And then, we will start from there. Like, what is getting in the way of you being there right now? Like, what are some of the challenges right now that you are having? It's emotional challenges that people are mostly aware, but they're not aware of mental challenges, right? Because we feel emotions, but we're not aware what beliefs and what stories are feeding those emotions. So you'll start with where the person is, and then, through inner guidance, I guide them to close their eyes, use their breath and their body to experience what it feels like. For example, what does it feel like when you feel constricted and in your chest? Experience that, and so I'm there and I'm guiding them to use their breath as an anchor to experience that emotion of constriction. Then we might invite that part of self that feels constricted. And then we might connect with that younger part of self that holds that constriction, and get to that moment when that constriction took a place, right, in your body. And then we work together. I guide them to communicate with that part of self from a place of compassion, understanding, and love and kindness with that part of self. So that part of self kind of melts, It's like that part of self just wants to be loved. Think about it. We all just want to be loved. That's the bottom line. This whole thing, everything that we are doing, like getting ourselves pretty, done up, achieving things, wanting to have money, wanting to give people presents, wanting to do, it's all about fundamentally us wanting to experience unconditional love. And we're not so much aware of it. We get lost on the way as we are doing that. We forget that that's ultimately what we really are craving for and needing for. And, my father was, really a catalyst for this, because I was 37 when my dad transcended, and his last words, I kind of laughed and chuckled when he said that, because my dad is humorous and funny. He's always funny when he's in those situations. But it was profound what he said. And he said, Miriana, he calls me Miriana, life is shit. And I was like, oh my God, and I understood exactly why he said that, because my dad never had love in his life, and he didn't experience love. So he looked at his 78 years of his life, and he summed it up in that. And I was like, my heart dropped. And I was like, oh my God, I cannot leave this earth saying that. Like, I cannot. Like, my life's mission is to embody unconditional love and to teach others how to unconditionally love themselves.
So when he said that, it wasn't that his mother never loved him, he just never felt it, or that she didn't actually love him. Like, when somebody says, I've never had love, what does that mean? And how do you know that? And also, when you say self-love, does that mean then, therefore, did have love because you have self-love?
Definitely his mother, I would say, loved him, but in a way that wasn't a healthy love, right? Your parent can love you, but in a way that is destructive, that it's hurtful. And his mom was an angry person, not happy with her husband, and she wasn't affectionate. And how children experience love is through affection, through engagement, through play, through you taking time to talk to them, to be with them. That wasn't part of my father's life, right? And it wasn't really part of my life either. And these days, it may be that what parents do, they give the phone to a child, right? So that they can relax because they had a stressful day and, they had to do things, and kind of like a child requires a lot of attention. It has a lot of energy, and it requires you to be present because that's how they experience love, right? And he didn't experience love through his mother. So he was chasing love, but never really experiencing it for himself. He was trying to get love from women in his life, like from my mother. But,
Right.
in the end, they didn't have a loving relationship, and my mother couldn't love him, and he was craving to be loved by her, and that didn't happen, And so he kind of attracted his own mother in his relationship, a woman who couldn't love him the way he wanted to be loved.
Right.
Because he didn't have a love for himself.
And that you bring up such an interesting thing that, you hear out there, we attract the relationships that maybe we're missing in our own childhood. We marry the person, or we become partners with that person that you wished you grew up with, but never did. But so therefore you married that person thinking that you can either change that person or that you'll finally get that love. So how does somebody get started with understanding this sort of self-care, self-love, approach? I think when I ask that question, I think about, bringing in love into your life first starts with loving yourself. I think I sort of paraphrased what you were saying. So how do you get started,
Well, you can start with the simple steps by choosing to practice consciously and mindfully compassion with yourself when you're making mistakes, when you're not being the best version of yourself, when you mess up, when you hurt somebody, you choosing to take time to accept, number one, that you did at that moment the best you could, that you could have done the better, and offering yourself room for forgiveness and kindness and compassion like you would with your own best friend, right? It's
Right.
like if your friend comes like to you and says, "Oh my God, I just said this horrible thing, to a friend of mine. I think I'm a horrible friend." Are you gonna really say like, "Yeah, you're a really horrible friend. Like you're really nasty.
I know
Like
you've
you're
got
really
lots of compassion
terrible."
and empathy for
I
them.
agree with you.
Exactly. Yeah, no, I know.
Right.
But if it was you, like being your own worst critic,
Yes, and this is where consciously practicing this compassion and radical acceptance, right? And forgiveness towards yourself, it's really important. And seeing yourself like, okay, I'm going to right now approach myself as my own best friend. So would I talk to my own best friend like this? This is where you can start with. But, this is
Right.
really hard in a sense because we're already biologically wired in our body to be harsh towards ourselves. We already have these imprinted limiting programs within ourselves. We already develop limiting belief systems about ourselves that are on a subconscious level, and we are not so much conscious, right? So emotions are really running hard, and they're wired hard in our bodies. And so this is where you need the support of another person who can really guide you to come back to yourself and begin to repair relationship with the aspects of your younger self. That's where the key is, like younger self. Once you do that, it's so easy to practice kindness and compassion with yourself. It's so easy to be aware, like, okay, that person is mad at me because I said this, but I know I said it from a good place and it's their thing. They need to deal with that. I'm going to choose
Right.
to be kind to myself, right? I'm not going to rip myself apart because this person is hurting right now because of what I just said, right? And you stop accommodating yourself to others. You live in your truth. This is when you can become really transparent and honest with where you're at without accommodating yourself to others, and taking care of other people's emotions and feelings, because that's not really your responsibility, you know?
Oh my God, let's talk about that. Where, I think as women, we bring on that a lot and I think women, the younger generation is very good at finding the therapist and getting the therapy. And in some ways I question, have they like everybody in their mid 20s 30s has a therapist. Well, when I was growing up, you never had a therapist, and if you did, it was shh, careful, don't say
Right.
anything. um, but I often think that the therapy is theory and you have to learn how to put it into practice. And so what you're seeing there, and a lot of your videos on Instagram talks about putting boundaries in place. And when I first heard the concept of putting boundaries in place, it was quite a few years ago. And I thought it was so harsh. I felt like, well, what do you mean? I mean, people need me. I want to help. I want to support. And you kind of got caught up. You can kind of get caught up in the drama of a situation, because you felt connected to that person or situation. But now I think I understand better what boundaries are, and which basically what you were just saying is understand what you own and understand what they should own, and learning to sort of detach from that. And so that's one thing. It's not just saying no to somebody. It's not just saying, oh, boundary, boundary, boundary.
Right.
It's understanding, I guess, like what triggers you, or like when do you know you need to put some boundaries in place?
When you understand your needs and you're able to acknowledge them, and really when you repair your relationship to your own inner child. Because when we are children and those ruptures happen in our relationship with our parents, those are the times when our needs were not met or diminished, or we got punished for it. We were misunderstood, or we were told it was not okay to feel the way we were feeling, right? A lot of times, like anger and jealousy and, like greed is like not acceptable, right? It's the something like, if you see a parent and the child doesn't want to share the toy with another child, the parent immediately like steps in and goes,
Yeah.
share that,
Oh, share.
like you have
Yeah,
to share
share.
that.
Yeah, yeah,
And
yeah.
it's kind of like you're forcing the child now to share this toy that is not ready to share, because you are afraid that your child might become selfish and therefore bad person
Right.
eventually when they grow up, right? And that's because they were taught that selfishness is bad. So we were very early on taught not to attend to our needs and feelings. We are taught to give, right? We are taught to give, we are taught to share, but we are not taught to respect our own feelings and needs. And essentially, when we talk about boundaries, we're talking about honoring and respecting what I need in this moment, and listening and being aware that my obligation is first to myself, first to me, and then I can serve others selflessly, because I have attended to myself and I have been honest, and now I have something to give, right?
Mm-hmm.
But if I'm
Mm-hmm.
giving unaware what I need, then eventually I'm tapped out. I'm
Mm-hmm.
resentful, I'm angry, I'm disappointed, I'm devastated, because now I'm expecting other people to give back to me and they're not giving back.
Oh my God, I love everything you just said there. So I think all my life I gave from an empty cup. And I think a lot of people give from an empty cup. And I maybe don't even think that they understand that the cup was empty. I
Right.
honestly felt like I didn't understand that my cup was empty. And so how do you fill your cup? I think this is what you were trying to say, but I'm going to ask it again.
Mm-hmm.
How do you fill your cup? I mean, I am a giver. I am a self-proclaimed giver. Like I give probably more than I receive for sure, but I don't always think, oh, I'm going to give so that I can receive. But
Mm-hmm.
I have caught myself giving, 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 giving. And then when I needed something, I never got. And it was like, oh, and
Mm-hmm.
then I catch myself because I gave from a place of not receiving, but then I did have some expectations of that person or those people, that it was my turn now to receive. And then that's when I think some crazy thoughts, you get angry, you lash out,
Mm-hmm.
whatever my embodied experiences. I just looked at my notes, my embodied experiences, create those triggers. And so I guess the question is, how do you fill your own cup? How do you know when it's full to the point where you can actually give? Or do you just shut down and not give anymore and just take until you feel like, okay, now I'm ready to give,
Mm.
yeah.
Yeah, it's a how again instead of like the feeling and connecting, because
Oh my God, I know.
how.
You caught me on our pre-call about this too. But how? I need to know how.
Yeah, and I noticed in your conversation you have a lot of hows, right?
I
And
know.
most people do. And even my person that is working with me on social media, she was like, well, give people how. And I'm like, it's not about how. I really hate that. Like, it's like there's no quick solution, because we have to remember we are feeling beings, and we form ourselves out of these feeling experiences. It's the experiences that wire our brain and the way we think, right? So it's about reconnecting with ourselves and coming back and feeling in our heart like, when I think about doing this, what does this feel like in my body and in my heart? Does it inspire me? Does it motivate me? Does it lift me up? Does it lit me up? Does it feel juicy? And if it doesn't, it's not your truth. It's about connecting and tuning in with your body, because your body doesn't lie. Your mind will lie all the time. Will tell you illusions, distorted truth. But the body speaks the truth. So when you imagine doing something, it's like when I think about doing something, I'm like, what does this feel like? Even like to the point you can start with how I started is like in the morning, I wake up in the morning, open the closet, and I'm like, what does it feel like right now? What color of clothes do I want to wear? What texture do I want to wear? I always go by what it feels like, because that's important. It rests on my skin. My skin receives message and sends back to my central nervous system and the brain. And then I feel either comfortable in what I'm wearing, or I don't feel comfortable what I'm wearing. You can start simple steps like that, start to develop a relationship with your body, which is yourself, part of yourself, so that you can start to tune in where your boundaries are, right? And when you're ready to give and when you're not ready to give, and to like, I'm not ready to give this yet. Like this doesn't feel good giving. When I think about giving this, it doesn't feel good. And respecting that, and being okay with it, that you're not ready to give. Instead of going
Yeah.
into the story, oh, you're a terrible person, like you don't want to give, you're a selfish person. No, you're not. You're just
Yeah.
not ready to give, and put the period there. I'm not ready to give, and that's what it feels like. And I'm going to put the period there, nothing more.
Yeah. That's really good. I love the word intention. We talk a lot about doing things from the present, being intentional, but that was a really good example of like how, like, take a pause for a moment and ask yourself, how do I feel
Not
about
how,
this at this exact,
not
but
how. What does it
not how.
feel
Okay,
like?
sorry.
It's okay.
What does it feel like? Yeah,
What
no,
does
see,
it
there we go.
feel like? Yeah,
What does it feel
because
like?
when you say, what does it feel like, it takes you straight to the body. When you say,
Right.
how does it feel like, it takes you straight to
Oh,
the
it
head,
takes me to my
thinking.
brain. Exactly. Exactly. Because actually, that's so true. Because when I just did that, how does it feel? I went to like, oh, what am I thinking? What am I doing? Instead of
What
what
does
does
it
it feel?
feel like?
What does
Yeah.
it feel? Then I think that's a much better connection. And it still draws a little bit on that masculine, but the masculine is behind me, as you said, versus
Right.
being in front, always leading. So that's a good practice to really work on the what am I feeling versus how am I thinking.
Yes.
That's really good.
We're in a culture of how, and to exit out of that, it's about moving into what. From how to what? What does it feel like right now? Like right now, you can take a moment and ask yourself, what does it feel like to have this conversation? And
Yeah.
all the focus goes inwards, and you start to feel like, oh, I got a little tingly sensation. Oh, I got a little energy of excitement. Like, oh, I got a little bit of energy of nervousness, when I am okay. It's like, it's
Yeah.
like all of a sudden you become aware of your inner world, because your inner world is so vast. And it is,
sorry, no, keep going. I'm sorry.
I was just going to say that the world that you create outside comes from your own inner world.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And so that brings me to one very critical question for you. And that is, when we are always in a state of how versus what. So how do I do this? What do I do? Or how am I doing it? Da, da, da. How am I thinking? And instead of what am I feeling? What
Does this feel
what
like?
is it? Yeah. What is it saying in my body?
Mm-hmm.
How do we deal with that gremlin? Because I think that how is a gremlin, and I do a lot of
You just said
work.
it. You just said it
Yeah,
again.
yes, but
It's okay.
the gremlin is a big thing for a lot of people. I do a lot of work in that area, and the self-sabotage and the stuff that can come from that how thinking, which I kind of think is a bit of the gremlin. So when we think about the gremlin and we think about self-sabotage, what is that making us feel? Being very careful with my words. What is that making us feel like when we are always just depending on the gremlin?
So you just asked that question, and I'm going to ask you to answer that yourself. So tune in with yourself. Close your eyes. Bring the breath into your body, into your heart and your solar plexus. As you exhale out, drop your awareness into your body. Just notice, what does it feel like when you're fighting that gremlin that you refer to? What does that feel like? What does it feel like when that's there in your body right now? What are you noticing?
Well, I
Breath
feel
in.
I definitely feel it in my hips. Like it's all, I guess, the root chakra.
Your hips. Yeah. The first chakra.
Yeah. The what
And
chakra
what do you
is
feel
that?
there? Root chakra.
Just tension. Yeah, the root chakra. So the tension, the tension, the I guess it's I feel stress there, but it's
Yeah.
maybe it's
So
a bit of the like a butterfly feeling, you know?
Yeah, butterfly feeling, right? So breathe into the hips, breath in, and breath out. Like a sigh breath, dropping your awareness into that butterfly feeling, that tension. Just notice what that feels like to be there. What does your body want to do when there is that feeling of tension, butterfly feeling? What does your hips want to do? Do they want to fold? Do they tighten? Just notice.
Yeah. I think that's a good way of approaching when you do have this how in your head, this gremlin in your head, to do what you just said and take that breath. Where is it? where is it impacting you? And how
Right.
can you release it? Like, I just want to kick it out.
Well,
Not sure
just
how,
breathe,
but
but just
there we go
you
again.
bring the
How?
breath into it, and you can do a movement. Like if you feel tension, take a moment to stretch your hips, and even talk to
Mhm.
them, and just love
Mhm.
them, right? Bringing love and attention to your hips, because it's not about resisting anything. It's allowing things to flow through you. The feminine way is not about resistance. That's the masculine way. The feminine way is allowing the energy to flow. Energy wants to flow. Emotions are what? Energy in
Energy.
motion. That's what
Mhm.
emotions are, expressing
Mhm.
a particular emotion. It's
Yeah.
energy motion expressing particular emotion. Emotions are what? Like they're frequencies. And so the nature of the energy is to express itself, and the expression of itself seeks for completion. So allowing just to move through. So if you're feeling resistance, feel the resistance and breathe. Allow, use your breath just to allow the energy to move through you, right?
Mhm.
We
Mhm.
trap the energy by resisting and trying to figure it out. How am I going to get rid of this? How I'm going to release this? There is no how.
Yeah.
That's the sort of
Right.
magic answer. But it's hard for people to understand that, because we are taught to think with how.
Right. No, that is so enlightening to shift your thinking from, or just to shift your way of being from this state of how to what. And
Right.
it's a real eye opener.
What and allowing. My teacher used
And
to say all the
allowing.
time. At first, I was like, "What?" He'd be like, "Allow, boo boo boy, allow." you know,
Boo
and
boo boy, that's great.
and it would be like, really, the word allowing means not resisting and using your breath to just like move through that urge, or wanting to resist what is there. Allowing it, inviting you. Another word I say, I invite myself into this experience. I
Right.
invite myself to feel this. I invite myself to have this experience. It's a very powerful way of moving into the new field of the possibilities of self without falling into the trap of fear and resisting. It's kind of like it helps you to go over the hump by saying, I invite myself into this experience.
Yeah, I love that mantra. What that feels to me like is that it won't, as you say, like our energy can get trapped if we're not
Mhm.
allowing it to flow. And so to me, that's okay. I'm going to invite this experience, but it's giving it permission to, I think, flow through you versus getting trapped. In my case, a lot of the hips. And I think a lot of people hold their stress and whatnot in their hips. But to me, just when I think about that, that's what it does for me is, okay, I'm not going to resist it, because then I think I probably will get trapped, but instead allowing to flow through, experience it, breathe through it, move through it, the sort of the somatic approach to,
Yes.
the whole
And not
thing,
adding the story. I'm
and
sorry to
not adding
interrupt
the
you. Not,
story.
yes, not adding the story, not engaging in meaning making, like making meanings out of things, just putting a period.
Yeah.
It's like, I feel angry. Just, okay, I feel angry.
Right.
Don't make a meaning. It's
Right.
just like, this is what's coming up. Allow anger to be there and allow anger to move. It's a
Right.
messenger. It's there to tell you something. So what is it there to tell me? Emotions are messengers. They're not your enemies. But our story
Right.
that I shouldn't experience this because I'm a spiritual person, right? I shouldn't
Right.
experience this because, I'm a good person, right? Um, oh, if I'm having this emotion, it means that I'm bad, right? It's these
Mhm.
stories that it's creating resistance of us, um, utilizing these emotions for our greatness and to help us to navigate the world better.
Yeah. So what I think I interpret that as is like not learning to not block how I'm feeling, but
Right.
to figure a way to get it to just flow, because it's going to come regardless. So
Right.
I could either get it trapped in my body and then forever be dealing with trauma, or I can choose to accept it, believe in it, and then allow it to move through. And I think that's really good advice for a lot of people, because I think we sometimes want to put a shield up to prevent us from any of these feelings and emotions, and, or just want to get rid of this emotion, or the way I'm feeling, but yet we're not really honoring it, I guess, in some sort of weird way, to allow it to just flow through.
Yeah, because we don't understand the energetics and we don't really fully
Mm-hmm.
understand the emotions, and because we have developed a lot of negative stories around the emotions.
Mm-hmm.
As a children, we were really not allowed so much to experience anger, right?
Mm-hmm.
Jealousy, selfishness, greediness. Like, we're not allowed. That's just like sort of not a desired emotion to have, right? And if we're experiencing that, we're oftentimes taught to suppress it and cut it off, right?
Right.
How many
Yeah.
times?
Don't cry. Don't do this. I mean, I don't know how many times in my life I've been told, don't cry, don't cry.
Right. Right. And so indirectly, non-verbally, what you're telling to your child is that you're not okay. This emotion is not okay. There's something bad about you if you're doing this, or if you're feeling this, right? Or, or in that moment, the child might experience not being loved. So if I'm feeling anger, I'm not lovable. I'm not loved. I'm not worthy of love.
Yeah.
Fundamentally
Yeah. Their
goes that.
interpretation of it. Yeah.
Yeah, because children are like, so egocentric. They think they move the world. Everything that
Yeah.
happens, they think it happens because of them. Because they're in a state of oneness.
Yeah.
They're in a state of
Yeah, for
oneness. And
sure.
we are not. We are in a state of separateness. And
Yeah.
because we're in a state of separateness and they're in a state of oneness, we don't understand their world. And they are
Right.
like stepping into our world, which is a state of separateness.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, okay. So I know you have a quiz out there that is a good start to understanding where you're at from a relation to self. I did the quiz myself, and there was even when I was mentioning to you that when I did do the quiz, I recognized certain behaviors even while I was answering the questions. I was much harder on myself than if I was answering that quiz for somebody else. And so, where does somebody get a hold of you? Where would they go, Mirabai, to get the link to the quiz? I'll put it obviously in the show notes. But what's the best place to find you?
Yeah, they can go to my website, self-relationalstudy.com. It's there. They just type in their name and, the quiz gets emailed to them. And they can just, download it and answer questions. And there's about 22 questions. And they have explanation of where they fall in the bracket. And it's a really good barometer of where you are in relationship with yourself. And it can be a really good starting point of where you need to start, right? But it can also give you some insights and understanding of yourself, right? And so, I encourage people that when they take a quiz, they can certainly call me and book a call, self-discovery call with me, and we can discuss that, their results and what came up for them. I'm totally open to that. And yeah, so they can find me there. It's very, very, very easy. self-relationalstudy.com.
self-relationalstudy.com. I'll put the link in the show notes. And yes, I am definitely going to continue on doing my work with you. I'm really excited for it because I really have never given this gift of understanding that self-relationship, the inner child. I mean, as I mentioned at the beginning of the podcast, I've done a bit of work in that area, but always got stuck because I didn't know any events. My mind is blocked on a lot of my events, but I know you said that we can work through that. You don't need to know.
You don't need to know. The body will
it's
tell
the
you.
feeling. Yeah, no, that's amazing. Listen, you have been absolutely amazing. I love your energy. I'm really excited to work with you. I hope that anybody that was listening to this podcast got a lot from it. And I hope that they reach out to you, because I think you are giving off a lot of really good energy, and you've done the work. So, it's good. So
And I
thank you.
continue to do my own work.
Exactly. Right. It's an ongoing, you're never fixed. That actually is super important, right?
Well,
That
it's not about fixing. Healing is not about
yeah.
fixing. It's the evolution of self. It's expansion of
Yeah.
yourself. And it's about coming back to the center of your own personal power and sovereignty and your own divinity, right? Realizing really who you are beyond the story that you told yourself and that others told you about you. So you have to unpack all of that to really realize really who you are. So it's really not about fixing at all. It's about just finding yourself all over again and falling in love with yourself.
Yeah, falling in love with yourself, the growth. So
yeah.
Well, thank you, Mirabai. I'm looking forward to our ongoing relationship.
Yes, me too. Thank you so much.
Hey, it's Lynette. Thanks for listening today. Please like and subscribe. And if there's somebody out there that you think could benefit from the episode, give it a share. Midlife is your time, so go get it.